And welcome to our accounting lecture. So generally, as I've mentioned in the first day, I'm predominantly math, but when there's a need, I do step into the accounting. Accounting is more of it's more of what do you call it? Let's say if you got work and a hobby. So my job is math and my hobby is accounting. So I do enjoy it. And I'm hoping that also by the time we get to the end of today's session, you'll also have as much excitement as Asen and I do. And when it comes to this, these are the slides that Asen and I worked together on some time, very comprehensive, but I've just taken a little bit of it in order to just focus on some of the core issues. And I'm sure you will know better that the topics that you are expected to cover in the upcoming test, those are very much significant topics. And when I say significant, it's because you are likely going to see them time and again. That's number one. And two, you are most likely going to see them in ITC, in your final exams, as well as in the APC. These are some of the core issues that accounting is founded on. So I will really want you to take as much as possible from today's session. And even more, one will then appreciate that there is quite a lot of content relating to this. So the idea is not to attempt to boil the ocean today, but is to help you build the foundations that will then help you to master any other topics. So that is our objective today. And just to quickly recap, we've got number one, income taxes. We've got number two, accounting policies, estimates, and excuse me, and errors. Then number three, we've got financial instruments, and we finish off with Forex. So for me, that's probably an entire weekend or week's lecture if we're to go into the detail. But we are going to make sure in the next 4 hours, we do as much as possible and as much as impactful. One of the things that I also said when we kicked off the journey, excuse me again, is that I want you not to limit your thinking to just the topics and therefore the coverage we're going to have in these lectures. But I want you to start building up the skills that you will need and be able to replicate elsewhere. What will that look like? That will look like today, I want everyone to have their standards with them. So everyone in here, go get your standard, have them with you, because in some instances, I'll want you to read with me and make sure you are doing what? You are getting wherever I'm going to be talking about directly from the standards. So it's always very important that you don't limit yourself to what myself as well as the other lecturers are saying without taking the opportunity to go and validate it elsewhere. So I'll want you to be able to challenge what we say to you, to be able to tell us how you're thinking differently about it and whether we're going to get to the same place. So that is my desire. And therefore, when you have your standard, you are able to validate, you are able to check, you are able to highlight, and you are able to start building your understanding of IFRS. Okay? Then to just then kick it off. So we are then going to do it from a discussion question. We're going to be covering NMLS, normal load shedding. So that is the question that my colleague Kanye is going to cover with you after the lecture component of today's session. Then in terms of the keys to success, you'll see that this is almost similar to the slide that I shared with you when we were talking about MEG. But what is now different is how we define technical knowledge. So here, when I say go and master technical knowledge, I'm essentially saying that go and be a master in IFRS. When they say you are an IFRS expert, I want you to embrace it, because you will then be saying that I know all these standards. I know them from back to front. I know how they work. Whenever there is an example, I know which paragraph it is trying to look for. It's a lot of work, but it comes with consistency. And I want you to start building that consistency from day one, to say that even for a small standard like changes in accounting policy, sometimes it's unfortunate that a lot of candidates don't read that standard. They always assume that they're going to do examples, and after doing examples, they will be all right. But there's quite a lot of gems in that standard that I want you to be able to unpack and be able to do what? To do and to understand from it. So that is block number one, understand the technical knowledge. Then now, integrated thinking. Integrated thinking looks differently now for what? For accounting perspective. How so? Because even for those that will be doing CTA for the first time, and more especially for the one that might be repeating, you will then realize that from a UNISA structure, these were previously two accounting courses. Now they are 14866. So which means that things that you used to probably think about differently are now going to require you to bring them together. That's number one. Number two, accounting by its nature, there are some topics that become very difficult to assess on their own, because either they build on something else and therefore they require you to know something before you start them. And this could be when they ask you to prepare a statement of changes in equity, when they ask you to prepare a statement of P&L, when now you could have companies in a group scenario, you could have tax effects, income tax effects, you could then have things in separate financials, you could have group share-based schemes. So there is quite a lot of integration in accounting. And another trend that we have been seeing at an ITC level is that accounting is also not an isolated discipline. You are, in terms of what we have seen significantly, is that audit, especially when there is a question on substantive procedures, there will first be an accounting piece. Or later on, there will be an accounting piece. And that's almost year in, year out in ITC. So now it means that understanding that IFRS is going to be crucial when you go to what? When you go to integrated thinking, because they will then give you and say, do the journal entries for investment. Then you are saying that, oh, it's good, I'm going to do fair value adjustments and for investment property. Then I'm going to do fair value adjustments and all these things. Then the next question will then say, what are the audit procedures to validate the accuracy of that valuation amount? Then you will need to start about the expert, about the auditing of the estimates and all these things. And these are then the kind of things that you need to start embracing now. You might not see it quite a lot, regardless of wherever you are from a CTA perspective initially, but they might start introducing it slightly, and over time, they're expecting it to be part of an embedded kind of approach. Then one of the ones that we've then seen from the other discipline then becomes nextly tax. Because, for instance, last year, I believe it was Jan, they had about 50-mark question, which was an income tax stroke accounting question. How so? Because they said calculate the taxable income. But to calculate the taxable income, you needed to reverse things like depreciation and impairment. That calculation alone was 12 marks or 12 to 15 marks, just to reverse the impairment, because you needed to then apply IS 36 to calculate the impairment. But you needed to then remember that in the Tax Act, there's no provision for impairment. So you needed to be triggered that I needed to reverse the impairment, but where's the amount? I need to calculate it. So that was that kind of question and the level of integration expected. A few years ago, they had an income tax question at a group level where there was a foreign associate and there was a tax recon and there were some assets that were being bought before the CGT date and all these things. So very, very much integrated from a transaction perspective. And as you speak to Madodonke tomorrow and you start getting how he thinks about tax and then reflect on what we are talking about today, you will then get to start seeing the bigger picture. And as you go through the course, you will then be able to start thinking about it more broadly. And by the time the year ends, you will be where they expect you to be. This will come more naturally. Then from a math perspective, we have seen also been integrated, for instance, bringing valuation together with free cash flows. So that is some of the level of integrated thinking that you will be exposed to. Accounting is the foundation for our profession. And one, integration is the first thing, being integration within the topics in accounting, then audit, tax, and management accounting and finance. So that is what I'm talking about in block number 2. Then block number 3 is the one where we are saying that some questions that we're starting to see trending up a bit are the ones that will then give you an SFP or a disclosure and ask you to evaluate for errors and misapplication that are against the IFRS standards. So this, therefore, framework that we spoke about before, it's equally important from an accounting perspective. And it needs to be tweaked a little bit in order for you to then find success. Okay, then that is just on the introduction side. Any questions there? Any comment, any input from that particular perspective?
Morning, sir.
Morning, Sandy.
How are you?
Very well. And yourself?
Thank you so much. I just wanted to understand when you talked about reading the standard.
Yes.
So the IS 8 one is quite small so that you can read. Then there's the other ones like IFRS 9, IS 32, and IFRS 7. In terms of reading, I find myself that I'm spending so much time in the reading and sometimes the English, sometimes it just gets a bit confused. So what would you suggest to someone like me you find yourself spending so much time on the theory, and then when you get to the questions, some stuff is not actually, it's not committed to memory?
All right, fair enough. And this is something that I'll also talk about when we get here, but just to that question, it's one, sometimes you will need notes or a textbook. Why? Because to your point, sometimes you read and the English is just confusing. And you're sitting there and say, is it really this, what they are saying? Or am I misunderstanding? And that's issue number one, when you just go through the standard without, say, a supplement text, like a notes or a textbook. And number two, it's always a matter of, you might think you understand something because your interpretation says X, whereas that X should actually be a Y. So at that point, and that's a little bit more risky, because for number one, you know that I don't know this, I need to make a plan. But number two is tricky because you're thinking that, oh, I hear you, this is what I need to do, but that's not indeed what you need to do. And therefore you then have this incorrect picture about what is expected. So one, you are likely to need a supplement. And that supplement, as I'm saying, it's either notes or a textbook. And you then have a standard with you to say that maybe let me just understand the recognition criteria. You read it and you say, this is what I'm understanding. But let me look at the notes. Is this really what the notes are saying? Am I aligned? So the benefit there is that you are testing yourself to say, wait, one, do I understand what I'm reading? Is my approach of reading it this way effective? Because if I consistently find myself reading and then looking at the notes or textbook, finding that they're saying something different, then I know that maybe there's a need to change my approach. Maybe there's a need to understand why am I understanding something like this, whereas it's actually this in case. So that is then issue number one, to say maybe then the approach should be I start with the textbook, then I go to the standards, so that I can now start to see and read with a bit of understanding. Then number two, was something that you should never underestimate, is to understand what is included in your syllabus or not. And if the example you gave it's quite important, because you then have standards like IFRS 9. You then have standards like IFRS 7. They are very detailed standards, but they are tricky. And there is quite a lot that they try to cater for, that SAICA has then said, we cannot expect this from someone coming from university. So we have decided to remove it from the syllabus. So for an important point will therefore to understand what is it that you are expected to know. And that will help you to just cut out some of that clutter and make sure you don't find yourself studying those things and confusing yourself, or rather investing unproductive time into them. And the third one is just to take a step back and understand the bigger picture. So the bigger picture is understanding what a standard is all about. A standard, each and every standard will then say, I'm here to help you with financial reporting for your PPE assets. I understand. Where should I start? Let's start with the scope. So the scope will then say, this standard is not applicable for leasing. But you might say, but a lease has got a PPE. Why is this not applicable? Then you are now taking it a step further and you are bringing your block 3 kind of skills, asking why and understanding why things are as they are. So that is very important, because what it does is that once you do or study that way, you'll find you no longer need to go back as much to some of the paragraphs, because you have now understood and have understood what it is all about or what it's trying to do, meaning that it's easier to make it stick to memory. Because now if I ask a lot of you about how does depreciation work, a lot of you don't need to open the standard, because that thing you have made it, you make sure that it makes sense to your mind, that the asset is being used up and therefore some of its value is going down. So that's it. You understand that concept. So it becomes necessary to continue to challenge yourself when it comes to that, to say that why do they have fair value measurement for financial instruments? Why is it mandated? And when you start asking such questions, you'll then find it's easier to commit things to memory, and they will not easily disappear after you've studied them, because you are now studying to understand, and therefore mastery will follow. So that is something that I'll encourage you to do, to say, number one, understand what's the problem and have reference material like notes or textbooks with you to make sure at each and every point you are validating your thinking. Then number two, it is to do what? Number two is to read with understanding, making sure you are asking the why and seeing these things the way that they should be. And number three is just to make sure you are clear about what you need to know and what you don't need to know, so that you don't find yourself being confused or over-investing unproductive time. So for me, those are the three things that will be crucial to mastering your IFRS. And one of the things that we're going to do is to then build on that. Why are things as they are? What does this mean? What is the world, or what is the problem that this standard is trying to solve? So that's how we're going to think about it. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Right. Here we are. We've got what? We have the lovely financial instruments. So maybe let me stop here.